So, welcome to CJ Learning Technologies and the webinar on ICFP and how it works. What I thought I'd do this session, rather than just going straight into the app, would be to spend a short amount of time, up to 10 minutes, just looking at the theory of ICFP and how smart curriculum fits into that national agenda. It's right to say that ICFP is a process which is becoming more and more to the fore in terms of the government's thinking about schools and schools efficiency. Efficiency across industry is a question that's asked, you know, are we spending the money right? Is it doing the right things? Are we getting the outcomes that we expect with the investment? It's not a method that's been used in the education system because we have a right understanding that all children deserve the best education that we can provide within the state system. Obviously, as money gets tighter and tighter, people are beginning to consider, are we doing the right things with the money that we are spending? So that's the measures that are held within integrated curriculum and finance planning are becoming very much in the public consciousness, certainly from a political level, and should be within school leaders' bag of skills and attributes. It's not something that has been advocated widely among the NPQH, the National Professional Qualification for Head Teachers, although over the last 18 months it certainly is coming to the fore. The Department for Education has just funded a program that is going to be delivered or is being delivered by the Institute of School Business Leaders, focusing on ICFP, training governors, trust boards, directors, head teachers, senior managers in schools in the attributes of integrated curriculum and finance planning. I have some feelings about the way that it's being done, but I'll keep those for this session just to keep this brief there, and maybe that's a conversation that any of you might wish to follow through later. So really I'm just going to dive into the presentation. So what you should see are, just to develop this language around what integrated curriculum and finance planning is. Some schools refer to CLFP, and the reason that it exists came from the Outward Grange Academies Trust under Sir Michael Wilkins, retired now and then is working as a consultant alongside some of the people within the EFSA and the DFE. But his system, called curriculum-led finance planning, was really where the public consciousness began. Prior to that, the Association of School Leaders, you'll see here under the guise now of Sam Ellis and previously under other staff, developed measures which were able to be explored within schools. Average class size, average contact ratio, pupil-teacher ratio, pupil-adult ratio, the average cost of a member of staff. These kind of things have been explored over the years. One would have to say that the narrative is not strong, because otherwise we wouldn't be in the position that we are now, where there are more and more schools in deficit budgets. Although you could take the political argument that there's not enough money there, I'm not going to go into that here. The question is whether the measures are strong enough to achieve that. We're going to look at those in a moment, just a little bit deeper. SIPFA and the Institute of School Business Leaders, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, also have methodology using the techniques, but as I'll show you in a moment, there are implications of using the methodology. Integrated curriculum finance planning was, as a term, created by Kate Copley, a deputy director of the FSA, because she wanted to find a way to describe this integration of finance, business leading within schools, and the design of the curriculum. The biggest issue that we face is that school business leaders and educationalists effectively talk different languages. And getting a language where they can integrate and they can co-relate and focus on the same thing is a challenge, because they often come from different worlds, education or business. there is a sense in which some educationalists will work on the very esoteric view of the best that we can do. Well, whatever it is, we will do the best that we can do, however much it costs, without worrying too much about it. So that idea that education is all that it can be for young people. But obviously it's state funded, and therefore it needs to be effective, and the state can't keep filling the holes of deficits, because, you know, where is that limit of how much money? Smart curriculum comes along alongside, in fact, it's been around as long as OGAT has been around. We have developed a slightly different approach in terms of the language and the narrative. Each of these have a different language to them, but what I'm trying to do within this is try to bring to some, well, a common language to the process. Leora Crudis within the Confederation of School Trusts has recently put out a paper that brings together these elements. I can share the links with you later if you're interested to read this. Some of you may well have already seen it. It really illustrates the processes. I'm just going to show you a screen now, which will just show you what I mean about the different languages. Excuse the numbers. It take a moment just to see the screen. It's a table which gives you the 4 approaches. So the ASCL approach, which is basically a what can we afford approach, how much could we spend? The SIPFA approach, which is a curriculum-led, what can we plan for? The OGAT approach, which you might say is a sector approach, which is based on, if we put a certain number of children in a classroom, what would that look like? And if we maintain that average class size, what would that do to the school size? And then a blended approach, which is what the ISBL are trying to advocate, which is to take 10 measures, which include the key 7 that are within the ICFP, and gets a curriculum design, or at least a school design structure. Without going into real detail of the numbers, you will notice as you go down this list, there's a suggestion that we are coming to a teacher cost. Now, we know that there is a percentage amount of money of the total budget spent on teachers. The issue is that which one of the decisions that we make about designing schools should be the main driver. You'll notice from these 4 approaches that effectively there are 2 extremes. 2 of them drive to a teacher cost with 60.75 teachers, with an average cost, you'll see further up the sheet, of 2.7 million. And then the ASCL and the blended approach get you to 71.9, 72 teachers at 3.2 million. Now, my concern is, which one of these are we working on? Lots of schools have taken the ASCL figures because they've been around for a long time, and effectively we're running at the top end of what we can afford. And then when other things happen, either we need more space or we lose children. This is a fixed cost, because once we've put them on permanent contracts, we then struggle because we then have to go into restructuring. Some of the schools that I've been working with over the last year, many will know that you've heard me say that we've been through restructuring processes up to 3 or 4 times with the inherent Section 188 costs of restructuring processes. My point on this sheet is there is a vast difference between the planning, the methodology that you're using, and there is still not a shared common language. The difference in costs here can make or break a school in terms of its finance. Certainly the average teachers within the system, obviously the SIPFA approach and the OGAT approach have more children in classes, and therefore they need less teachers to deliver. It will cost less, but the narrative is an uncomfortable one for a lot of educationalists, because they will say you're just bumping up class sizes and making the job harder to achieve. And then with the centre on well-being, that's understood. What I'm just going to move to now is, you will have seen, if you're an academy over the last term, the SRMA, the School Resource Management Advisor's self-assessment tool, and I've just pulled out here a sample of the table of the data that's being required. what I'm showing here in terms of the small diagram on the left-hand side is the theory that we're looking at is 80% of the spend of any school is pretty much on staffing, whatever school it is. If it's a primary, then it's likely to be slightly higher, might be 85, could be 90. If it's a secondary school, it's more than likely to be around 80 plus. You'll know, those of you that have spoken to me previously, that I've seen these where the staff spend of total income can be over 100%, and there's little understanding of, well, where's the other money coming from? One comment I would just briefly make as we come to the end of this section is this, at the top, the average, the spend. What I said earlier about this common language, you'll notice on this sheet, it's asking for the percentage spend of total expenditure rather than the relative spend as a proportion of total income. This is what I mean about there's different measures that are being used. And when somebody quotes the 80% or we've got it at 65%, it is still important to clarify what it is that you're measuring. I'm not sure that this is entirely helpful, because in most narratives about school funding, it is a question of what is your total income and how are you spending it, rather than what's your total and how much income, how much are you spending, and then what's the proportion of elements within that spend. Whatever it returns to, we just need to be able to analyze on a base measure so that it makes sense. You'll notice here that we've got the core in the section D here, the school characteristics. We're still looking average class size, teacher contact ratio, pupil adult ratio, pupil teacher ratio, the number of senior staff as a percentage of the workforce, and the average teacher cost. And then obviously outcomes to school. We'll come back to that analysis that I've done, and I'll talk through with many. Is the school efficient? Is it effective? And is what they're doing ethical? The efficient is, do we get these numbers so we're balanced? The effective is, are the outcomes that we are achieving right relative to the amount of investment that we're putting in to do the various things that we're doing? And then obviously there's that question about the ethics of curriculum design, which is why smart curriculum is what it is. So there are the 7 measures. I will just say one question about it, particularly when we're dealing with average class size and average teacher cost, the principle that they are averages. We all know that there are concerns about, particularly within the outcome market, the outcome arena, so where outliers affect the average grades. So this performance, progress performance within schools, and that's the move away from focusing just on attainment. In the same way, there are questions about average class size, average teacher cost. Particularly in a school, if you have a large number of unqualified staff and you have a highly paid head teacher and senior leadership team, they will be extremes. And I wonder whether the average teacher cost and average class size, sixth forms with 3 or 4 children in it, and key stage 3 classes with 28, 29, 30, up to 32, whether the average is really helping us to understand what's going on. And certainly within the app over the next little while, you'll see some moving to median levels, and then these whisker and hair type charts where we're looking at quartiles and where are the main body of our work, because so much of what is done as the numbers you've seen previously, focusing on average where we've got significant outliers, doesn't help the process significantly. So I just want to go now into the app and just talk through where we've got to theoretically, and then we're going to look at the app in terms of some of the new developments. So just the basic principle, our start point is the curriculum. It's not how much can we spend. So the question we would ask is, if the curriculum, if we've got a certain number of learners in the school and there's an average class size to work to, what would be the curriculum size? So how many individual lessons? Now that might be In a primary school focused on the hours. In a secondary school, it might be focused on the periods that are designed. So and those periods can be of various different lengths, anything from 35 minutes to 100 or 120-minute lessons. Now, we still work with schools that have got 15 periods in a week, and those 15 periods are 120 or 100 minutes long, so they are long days. There are still schools that are running 8-period days of 35 minutes, and maybe even more than that. Mostly in a primary sector, we would base it on the number of hours that are delivered within a week. Typically, it's around 25 hours a week. What this chart is showing is we've got that blue part, which is the design of the curriculum. When we buy the staff to deliver that curriculum, again, most primary schools think of one class, one teacher. But in reality, that's not the case, because 10% of their time is not in the classroom, it's PPA. And if we're buying a non-teaching head teacher, the load on certain other staff, deputies, assistant heads, subject leads, and so on, then the orange part on the end is planned, untaught lesson time. So in any school, there is an orange part and a blue part. The blue part is where we say we have contact with children, and that's where we get this contact ratio from. Now, the optimum, certainly the DFE at the moment, is working on that ratio between those two, the blue and the orange, being 78%. Some academy trusts have tried to push it to 79. My experience of most schools tells me that it tends to sit somewhere between 50 and 60, which means that we're buying a lot of time that's not used for teaching in the classroom. Now, if we just take this a little further, we just represent it. If the average class size in the blue section is 27, that doesn't mean that every class there is 27, but the average across a year group, then the number of planned curriculum, the number of planned lessons is what we would refer to as the basic curriculum. The average class size across Key Stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 would be that size. It's different in nurseries because you'd expect that to be smaller. It's different in the sixth form because it's rare to have classes in the high 20s in a sixth form. So the default size for the rest is 27. You can increase that or you can decrease that. That will make your basic curriculum a larger or smaller matter. If it's a primary and you're increasing the class size, then your basic curriculum will be smaller. If you're decreasing the class size, some have asked if they can set it to 25, you can do that, but then your basic curriculum or your organizational basic curriculum will be larger because you've got less children in the class. The contact ratio in this case is optimal. We're aiming for it to be, well, there's a debate. 78 is certainly what was presented in the latest data that came through. The calculation on the SRMA self-assessment tool was 78. In reality, I would suggest that would put most schools in the amber and red areas, because most schools, certainly those that I've seen recently, are nowhere near that. It may be an aspiration. ASCL used to talk of it being somewhere between 72 and 76. They are now talking about somewhere nearer 78, but in reality, that's not what we find. So teachers teaching more with their time maybe have, will have an issue in terms of well-being. That will be a question that will come up. It is possible for you not to increase an average teacher time by reducing the number of leaders that you have, which is a technique that some schools are looking at. Many would refer to it as the Finnish model, because that's how schools are structured, successful schools within the Finnish system, and there's been some analysis of that. That's to be sorted separately. Now, the question is here, so if the average class size goes down, the number of planned lessons goes up, and that's, in our language, we would say your curriculum is enhanced. The question is, how far can you go with that? The anomaly within this principle is that the contact ratio in this example will not change. So contact ratio alone cannot be an effective tool, because you could have an oversized curriculum that does not, well, it is effective and it produces outcomes, but you can't afford it because the curriculum is too big. You can have the contact ratio measure, and you could do this at 78%, but it means that you would have a lot of non-teaching periods. The question is, how far can you enhance the curriculum? So the top question, how large a curriculum relative to the number of learners? The number of learners is the key, and there you would need to have an amalgam of average class size and contact ratio. So just moving on. The question that we find in this process, you see these diagrams, the number of students, the target pupil ratio, the number of classes. The issue that we see is that in a lot of schools, the basic curriculum is grown. So here is our basic curriculum, taking our language, we enhance it, but then we grow it even further. Usually that's got something to do with staffing. We buy the staff to fit the curriculum, and then we buy a little bit more, maybe 3 to 8% extra. That makes things fit. But then when an interview comes along and 2 maths teachers arrive and we want to employ both of them, we then start to add to this. So this is where we start overstaffing, or we enhance the staffing. The issue that we find is that next year, when they've got a permanent contact, we need to find them something to do. So we increase the curriculum size because we've got the teachers. And then we have that mindset of, oh, we need to overstaff core subjects. So we do it again. And the cycle that we find is that curriculum has grown and now is very embedded. So we can do all the calculations around average class size, contact ratio, the number of adults to pupils and so on, but we haven't really articulated how big should the curriculum be relative to the children in the school. That's the process that we go through. Okay, what I'm going to do is to finish the share here, and I'm just going to move to the app because I want to show you some of the things that we've been changing in time. Hopefully you can see my screen change, and you should now be able to see the app in front of you. This is a real school. We've shown this data before. So the curriculum decision that we found when we began with this school was that their curriculum was larger. In terms of how we would explain that curriculum, we're saying that it's a threshold focused curriculum. They have bought more staff than they have planned to use. And you'll notice on here that they've got the basic and the organizational, which means they've played with the, in global parameters, they're looking at the class size. They've also done an analysis of how the support staff are being used. So we've got some planned time and bought support time, and based, because they've put their budget in, we've got an average period cost or an average hour cost for teachers and for staff. Now, that's great. When you've done your snapshot, you'll know then that we've got the ability to do a modeling view. So this school has done a bit of modeling. It hasn't changed massively. There's a bit of work that's been done on year 10, but what they're looking at is this process for next year. Now, what we have found with schools, and just moving into the new features, is that what we want to be able to do is to see, well, okay, if I make the changes, what impact is that having? So what we've done is to build in a couple of new features. So I'm just going to go back to the original snapshot. You'll notice next to the analysis choice, there is now a new analysis comparison button. Now it's going to ask you some questions as we go in. What we do is we're going to say, I want to look at the difference between my original snapshot and my in-year modeling phase. So what difference has it made? So I'm in the start point, which is the demo snapshot, my snapshot. I'm then, in this case, there's only one other to pick, it's the modeling phase. So I'm going to pick the modeling phase. And now what we do is we've got curriculum, staffing and finance, and it shows me, and I've done some changes here that you can see, the planned curriculum. So the first page is about curriculum. Sorry, before I go into numbers, let me just show. So this shows me that I'm selecting a reference point, which is my demo, and I'm looking at my comparison point, which is my modeling. I've only got 2 in this case. I can reselect here, so I could, and it tells me here there's only 2 analyses for this school, so I'm only going to be looking at the start point of this point. If I've got more analysis, then I can see different points here. If I want to do a second year, and I want to do start point of the year to my model, I can change either of them. There's only 2 on this one, and we'll just work with that. So the curriculum. So what we have now is they've decided to go into the curriculum and explore in year 10 that there were lots of alternative provision, lots of very small classes, and they want to look at different ways of doing that. So they've actually removed, in this case, 18 teaching periods. That they've come out of option blocks and classes. We can look at where that comes from, but that's just from the model. They've reduced the enhancement by 0.8%, so it's gone down to 12.6. One would suggest it could be higher than that, but that's something to discuss as they go through. So target setting here is a real potential. Now the budgeted average teacher cost won't have changed. They haven't changed the budget and they still have the same number of teachers. The question here is focusing, is the curriculum the right size for what we're doing? They've bought the time, but the question is whether they're using it where they need to be using it. Now, the cost of the enhancement has gone down by £23,000. So dropping those 18 periods has had a significant impact. Now, it could be that if we were to drop to 30 periods, that gets us to the value of a member of staff. And it would be that if I'm appointing for next year, I would not be looking at reappointing a member of staff. Now, notice in this case, the contact ratio has gone down and the average class size has gone up slightly. Well, there's one more class that's got 23 in it as opposed to the 22. So out of the 10 classes at 23 or 22, 7 of them were 22, 3 of them were 23. Now we have 9 of them 23, 1 of them 22. So there's a difference, but we will need to see that change. Now that's how we would use the curriculum. If we go into the staffing, we haven't done any changes on the staffing here, and we would need to model some staffing differences. So if we were going to drop the number of teachers, we could drop those teachers out if we needed to. Now, that's not necessarily about moving yourself into constructive dismissal and saying, this person's going. It's a contract list and we can model that. I'll show you that in a second. But what we're looking for is how would that look on the app? So effectively, we're now saying the curriculum is the driver. What do I need to do? Now, because it's in this position, I can go back into the app and I can say, well, okay, so what does that look like in curriculum terms? Now, we've looked at year 10. What we did with year 10 is to take out some of the, there was a learning support group. Now, actually, that was taught by an HLTA, and it wasn't necessarily part of the teaching structure. The child is coming out of a lesson and is taught by an HLTA. Now, that is a provision, not a curriculum matter. So we didn't need to put that class in here. Now, it's not hiding a cost, but it's being careful about how that's used. The other element here is that this costing, the English, maths and science, we've invested a lot of time here. And in fact, the class size has gone down to 18. So in real terms, this is where I would be looking next in terms of strategies and performance. One of the questions they've got here in this school is that they're using the English lessons to take out some children to do Latin and Mandarin, which is fine. But again, the Mandarin in this case is taught by an outsourced provision. So it's effectively like we've just described with the alternative education. So it may be that we could articulate that differently and this curriculum does in fact look a bit more efficient than it is showing here. So the average class size here, and you'll notice in all the parts that we've added, there's features there. You can change the class size. The target class size in this school had been dropped to 26. If you remember on the front dashboard, you'll notice it said basic curriculum and the organizational curriculum basic, because they have dropped the class size here. I'll just drop back to show you that. That class size was dropped so you can see that difference here. Now, the comparison is designed to give you the ability to make some decisions about focus. We've deliberately done it in the same way that the dashboards are set up. So you've got the analysis on staffing, so we can see the deployment of staff around what you're structuring and what you're buying and what surpluses I've got. So here I've got 64 teaching periods of humanities, more than I need, but it may be that some of that time is backfilling business, and it could be that I need to put in a second subject on my staffing grid to show that element. Now I'm just going to go to the staffing grid and then we'll come back. Sorry, I've gone over slightly. I'll just finish this section. So what this takes us to now is you go straight to the staffing grid. That's interesting. I can't see any staffing in here. There we go. That's it. If I just move across here, you'll note that we've got the subjects, their primary subject. Now in this case, they've not been put in. So what it's saying is the primary allocation will be the allocated periods here. And if they were doing a second subject, then I would fill in their second subject here. So if that humanities was to be business, I would fill in my business. If I can type. Trying to look at a screen away from me. So I put in business and then I would put in an allocation. Now it may be that I'm going to give 9 periods to business. Oh, that's why it's not reading, because I've put it in the wrong. There we go, that's better. Apologies for that. Let's try to look at a screen further away from me. So if I save that time, then it will calculate that time, and you'll notice it's backfilled. This person, AJS, had 42 periods. They would have been 42 on the primary, but that was a science member of staff. I've given them 9 periods of business. So now it's going to calculate back that that's dropped that one to 33. Now I can do that with every member of staff. Now I said to you earlier that if I was going to restructure and I was looking at where I'd got surpluses, and I might want to consider what would a change look like, it might be that this person here, I'm going to pick up CRS. If this person, what would it look like if that person wasn't on the allocation for next year? This isn't about making them redundant. It's just saying, well, if I want to structure, what would it mean? What could it look like in terms of savings? So if I was to change that no, not active for next year, not made them redundant, we've just simply said, let's model what that looks like. We can put in a no, and then that person drops off this list and it's changed the allocation. What I can do is go and look at view and restore deactivated entries, so I can bring that person back if I need to. So in terms of modeling, I can look at roles, and if you wanted to, you could anonymize these and have them simply as contracts. Teacher 1 is a geographer, teacher 2 is a scientist, teacher 3 is an English member of staff. The staff code you will use to identify the people, but it gives you the ability to model a way forward without getting into constructive dismissal issues later on. So if I just go back to the app now, we're going to come back to the dashboard. So what I've done is done a bit of work on moving these staff around. So I can use the secondary subjects, you'll notice that that one's now dropped and that one's increased. And I think the science one should have dropped. If I move that, you can see them moving on the screen. That's the dynamics of what we now look at in terms of staff projection. You've got a straight link to the app at the table there. So analysis comparison is used to start the conversation. The last thing I will just say just before, because as ever I've gone on a lot, you'll notice that the one small change came through yesterday. Up until this point, locked analyses. So here, this is a locked one, so the snapshot's been finished. Up until this point, the locked analysis, a report button appeared here. You pressed on the report button and you've got a diagram in the middle of the screen. What we've done, we've found and listened to users of the app that they've found that quite uncomfortable, and it's not been the best way to read the reports. So what we've done is this: when the analysis is locked, so once you've finished a snapshot, the report icon now appears, sorry, the report menu replaces the data entry menu. So if it's a live analysis, you'll see it says data entry. Once an analysis is locked, you'll see the report icon appears. And now in the same way that the analysis comparison works, you've got three sections. I think this is a report one, so there's nothing in these other sections. But a report will appear here as before, a summary, and then some recommendations. The summary that I've written here for this, this particular snapshot is that it's a threshold-focused curriculum model with the resources focused around the outcome threshold, specifically years 10 and 11 and 12 and 13. The enhancement of the curriculum is over the 8% threshold, meaning there's a significant investment in these year groups at the cost of the lower year groups. Our recommendation would be carefully consider the profile of the curriculum, that's the bottom left-hand corner of the dashboard, as to whether the focus on the curriculum investment at Key Stage 4 and 5 is effective. There is a degree of inefficiency, it's over 8%, in that there are very small classes in Key Stage 4, but on balance, the classes in Key Stage 3 are reorienting the profile of the curriculum might enable the higher curriculum engagement, higher outcomes, and more secure progress, reducing the need for non-outcome focused classes populating the option structures. I'm just going to go back to here to say that means this could be invested here. You wouldn't need the outcome, the non-outcome classes, and this could be more efficient, meaning that all students would get the best deal. There may need to be some enhancement here because the classes are smaller. You certainly don't need the differences in teaching here, although some of this might be used for cover supervising. I did talk about how this time is used, and the HLTAs are in here, and it may be that putting that option provision in the planned support time is the place to be discussing it, because it's delivered by these teachers. That makes this more efficient, it makes this more efficient, and it makes this more efficient. Hopefully what I've done is to show you why we start with the curriculum and not with how many teachers can we buy or how large the classes should be. Although there are elements of all of them, what we're trying to do is to focus on the educational conversation and not just on the business conversation. And that's how we're working with schools to improve the efficiency of the process. Okay, I've gone over by about 10 minutes. We've got 5 minutes for questions. You've got two choices. Either turn your microphone on and then let me know what you'd like to unpack. And by all means, if you want to stay on just for a few minutes longer, then please do so. I'm quite happy to go a little longer. If you've got questions that you don't want to say out loud and you would be happy to type, just click on the chat icon. You should have a more button with some a link to chat, and then just send me a message. You can either send it publicly or send it specifically to me. I'll give you a moment just to think through. Are there questions about the process that you would like to explore? I'm always concerned when it goes very quiet. I've either explained it well and you're okay, or you can't hear a word of what I've said. Just let me know if you've got any questions. Okay, I've got my chat screen open, so if you do feel, I will just go back to the app then just for the last few moments just to just talk through some of the things that are coming through. We have responded with this report feature simply because people were finding, particularly for presentation of SLT and going to board meetings, governing board and so on. One of the things that we want to be able to do is to get you so that you can export these. At the moment, because of the way that the app is designed, that's a challenge because everything that is done within Live Dataset is all screen-based. What you do now have the facility to do is obviously if you cut and paste this into a Word document or whatever, that will work for you and it will keep the formatting. What we're working on, and hopefully will be out by the end of this week, there will be a PDF button where you'll be able to download the whole report. So the 3 sections, curriculum, staffing and finance, although obviously there's not detail in this sample version, and you will be able to see that data. So you'll be able to export it as a PDF. We are also working, and I didn't mention specifically on the analysis comparison, I will show you the finance page. You'll notice on the finance page that there's a comparison to expenditure and a comparison to income. Remember I said at the beginning, this difference in language, we would prefer using this data as in the comparison to income. Certainly, if we were to go to the finance pages, all of this comparison typically understood in schools is done of total income. That's why we represent this. I mean, obviously there is a question here about the security of this amount of spending on permanent staff, because it is relying on transient funds. The secured funds based on a secure role in this pink section, the per pupil funding or ARPU, this amount of money is only 70% of their income. 30% of their income is from letting, catering, visits, all sorts of other things, SEN, PPG, sports premium, whatever else, non-capital funding. But 30% of it, in this case, is that kind of money, and they are relying on at least 11% of that money to fund. And if you had a change, it would cause some significant issues. This school had a slightly falling role, but they also have quite a fair amount of income from other sources, and they are relying on that to provide them the means to deliver. So it's an interesting narrative to get into. The other thing is the proportion of support staff and admin staff. This school has a large proportion of administration. Now you could get into the questions about whether that's down to non-teaching heads of year, and they would be admin rather than education support. You know, we can debate those reasons. I won't get into that now. That's another webinar. But in terms of the comparisons, that's why we have put both of those into this analysis comparison sheet. What I've shown you here is the potential conversation that goes on around curriculum design. So we just got a message in. Thank you. Will this help us identify where we can focus the greatest impact, both in short and long term? Yes, it will. What it's going to do, I mean, effectively, it's going to tell you to start with where you are investing your teaching time. You will know the profile ability. Sorry, if you can see me just sharing the screen here, your curriculum profile will be different from this, I'm sure. Impact of imbalance in the year groups, where you're putting your time, you will see that come out here. We'll also, if I just show you here, we can see how much of your per pupil funding is being spent on teachers and how much space you've got. Now in this school, they're not investing much in Key Stage 3, a lot in Key Stage 4 and 5. There is still some funding. I don't know whether your school, I believe your school doesn't have a sixth form, it's 11 to 16. So it would be a question of, are we investing well in the lower years to achieve what we need to coming through? Now, obviously, the one thing about these charts is that although this is a snapshot, it's giving you a position of where you are now. Each of these will roll forward. If I decide this curriculum in year 10 is going to be the same curriculum for year 11, and in most secondary schools it will be, then the decisions that I make here will impact me for the next 2 years. Well, in fact, if you've got a situation where your year 9s are making Key Stage 4 decisions, you are going to live with that through here. So this is about the processes of choice that they're making now. My question is, if you know the profile of the ability, so the HPAs, MPAs and LPAs, the low prior attainment to high prior attainment, it may lead you to a question about what this should look like. Because a lot of schools are focusing their curriculum on the middle, and then HPA conversations are an incidental. Well, what are we going to do in addition to provide for high performing students? We generally deal with LPAs, the low prior attainments, because we've got support staff, but in terms of the range of ability, the question of what the profile of a curriculum should be, it will be a snapshotted position because you'll do it year by year, but you need a position to be able to say, well, these are the staff I've got, and I need to be able to project for next year what that could look like. So this analysis comparison, the ability to say, this is where we are now, that's what we think next year could look like. Then obviously moving forward, that resolves this issue of these two, and then moving forward from a year 7 into a year 9. Then obviously what a lot of schools are doing with this is they're modeling over time and they're projecting forward. What this will do, it won't tell you what it's going to be in 5 years' time, but it does give you a pattern that you can start modeling a curriculum philosophy around. This is what we do, this is how we do it, and we are flexible enough to deal with staffing, curriculum, structure, and so on. So to answer your question, yes, it does, because well, I mean, the other element of it is this is a focus on curriculum. One of the other issues will be role, and it may be that in a particular year group, this is enhanced because we've got a curriculum that's too large because the role is too small. So there's questions around techniques of managing that. There are techniques for doing it, which I won't go into in the moments we've got here, but you could do some innovative ways of managing this. Now, either sharing with a neighboring school, that's a consortium style, what we would call nested teaching, which was effectively vertical teaching, putting minority subjects with multiple years in. There are some challenges with that because that means that you have to sustain it for the younger children. And if none of the next generation, the next cohort choose a subject, you end up with some small classes, but it is a technique that's used within small schools, nesting. So sharing, nesting, co-teaching courses, Some schools want to offer performing arts and music. Well, if you put them both in the same class, the teacher is generally the one that would be teaching both. It's not something that I would do widely because you need some pretty special teachers to make it work, so you get full range outcomes. But generally, those kind of positions come because we have challenges with the role. So curriculum, and that's so planning and delivering a curriculum. Sorry, I hope this is I'm giving you a flavor of the conversations because it's many and various. This curriculum design has got some anomalies to it. It's got some features to it. Any school will have that, and there'll be decisions to make. How these roll through a school, the current conversation about 3-year Key Stage 3, 2-year Key Stage 3 against the Key Stage 4. I would say there's a strong case for a progress conversation. Certainly, and I'm saying it that way so it's not just an Ofsted driven, Ofsted don't like 3-year Key Stage 4s. There are some specific issues, and one of them I might illustrate just really quickly. If you put an option structure like this in year 9, then you have to balance 3 years of very expensive curriculum, and you can't do anything about it for 2 years. You're going to have to live with it if it's already started for a further 2 years. So a 3-year Key Stage 3 and a 2-year Key Stage 4 is a conversation to have. So to answer your question in brief, fluctuating numbers impacts curriculum size and role. There are techniques for delivering it, and it will show you where the questions are. The strategies that come out of it will be many and various, and we would look to support you in making those decisions, and then certainly making a curriculum effective. I hope that, I know that was a long answer, but that's really where that is, because it is quite a challenging position. I will say, you know, this school was on a journey. It's a real school with a journey that they're on. 13.5% was a reduction from the start point, which was over 35%. Now, obviously, a 50% curriculum, if we consider a 6th form entry school, a 50% enhancement means they're running a well, they're putting 50% extra curriculum. So 6th form, six classes in a year group become 9 classes in a year group. 100% would be half-size classes. It's not unusual that we see classes of 11 and between 11 and 15. So it's not unusual to see this. But obviously that's a question of balance of curriculum. Could we invest in children more earlier in their school life to achieve outcomes that are secure? That's what this purpose is about. So yes, it will open questions. What we're not saying is it gives you specific answers. What we will do in the section is to say, this is what we see, and we would recommend you look at this. Now, you can either respond with that, you do those yourselves, or you can speak to me, and we can talk you through how that might be achieved within a school. Okay, I'm conscious that I've gone over by 8 minutes, so try to answer what is quite a deep question there, but let me assure you that it will show you that. I think actually sorry, I don't know all your names, so I think I'm with you on Monday evening, where I can show you specifically how that works. Thank you, Laura. Glad it was helpful to you. Hopefully you've got access as you need it now. It should be live for what you need, and I'll see you soon.